I am not here today to showcase the actual decision made, or the decision I may have made as the leader in the emergency situation I will describe. Instead, I will analyze how the leader applied concepts of decision-making in their emergency response, and I will suggest a decision-making process and methods I would take if I were the leader in this emergency response situation. First, I will address the emergency in question. Second, I will showcase the decision-making process. Third, I will evaluate the leader's decision-making approach. And finally, I will suggest a recommended research-based decision-making approach to the emergency. On January 13, 2018, Hawaii residents received an alert on their phones that was quickly picked up by news outlets alerting them to an inbound missile threat. According to news sources including CBS News and Huffington Post, the state's siren alert system did not sound. Nonetheless, Hawaii residents responded with panic and many sought shelter. It took the Hawaii Emergency Response Management Agency, who was responsible for issuing this alert and all disaster alerts in the state, 38 minutes to notify residents of the mistake caused by human error. Next, I will showcase the rational decision-making process. Then we will look at the actual emergency response and the decision-making steps and methods they appeared to use. In 2013, Bazerman and Moore noted to make a rational decision, one should follow 6 steps. First, define the problem. Second, identify the criteria. Third, weigh the criteria. 4, generate alternatives. 5, rate each alternative on each criteria. And 6, compute the optimal decision. To go a little more in depth, while defining the problem, it is beneficial to know the situations and the history. While generating alternatives, Leclerc and Mondevenu wrote in 2013, it is likely necessary to assess risk and look at options through different lenses. Ultimately, diversity among decision-makers is important, but applying different lenses can also achieve a similar outcome. Lastly, while making a decision, the decision-makers may benefit from acting in a timely fashion, as noted in an anonymous 2014 Inseed article post. Next, I will explore how these steps were most likely used along with other decision-making methods in the emergency response. Let's look at the actual emergency response. While the initial alert mistake was Hawaii Emergency Management Response Agency's fault, as this agency is responsible for all disaster alerts, the state had several leaders who responded to the emergency. For example, according to CBS News, State Representative Tulsi Gabbard was the first state official to publicly acknowledge the mistake as she tweeted at 8:19 a.m., 12 minutes after the initial alert, that the alarm was a mistake. Huffington Post reported on January 20th that Hawaii Governor David Ige was notified by government officials of the mistake only 2 minutes after the alert. However, he waited until 8:24, 17 minutes after the alert, to acknowledge the mistake on his social media outlets. Finally, the Hawaii Emergency Management Response Agency issued a follow-up alert notifying residents of the mistake 38 minutes after the initial alert went out. The agency acknowledged the accident was caused when one person pushed an incorrect button, sending out a pre-written alert to all Hawaii residents during an internal training event. Additionally, the agency noted it took over 30 minutes to issue a response because there was not a cancellation feature in the alert notification system. With that, according to Huffington Post on January 14th, the agency put 2 new processes in place. First, to help avoid the mistake in the future, the agency now requires 2 people to sign off on alerts before they are sent to residents. Second, the agency added a cancellation feature to the alert notification system, allowing a cancellation to be issued as quickly as an original alert is issued in the case of an accident or a mistake. Now that we know the response leaders took, let's look at how leaders may have used Bazerman and Moore's rational decision-making process. First, as Huffington Post reported, officials identified the mistake within 2 minutes of issuing the alert. With that, they quickly identified the problem. There were multiple problems, including how the mistake was allowed to happen, but the initial problem was that residents were falsely alerted to an immediate and major disaster. Spokespeople from the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency told news agencies that they needed to act quickly and accurately in alerting as many residents as possible of the mistake, thus identifying the criteria. Based on information from news agencies, and given a decision needed to be made quickly, leaders may not have weighed the relative value of each criteria, which could have led to a less than thorough approach to Step 6, which I'll get to shortly. According to news agencies, the military alerted the governor of the mistake only 2 minutes after it occurred, but the governor did not notify the public of the mistake for another 11 minutes. It is unknown if the governor or anyone in the state office looked at alternate plans for alerting the public of the mistake. As mentioned, given it seems there may not have been alternate solutions generated, there was likely little time spent determining how well each solution achieved each criteria. Finally, as mentioned, given the criteria may not have been thoroughly weighed, leaders may not have spent much time computing which solution scored highest with each weighted criteria. Leaders made the ultimate decision to alert residents of the mistake via the original alert system method, and what they told news agencies was the quickest way possible. Hawaii leaders likely used other decision-making methods during this intense emergency situation. First, Hawaii leaders in this case most likely had the affect heuristic, as described by Bazerman and Moore, in play. Emotions were running high, and this could have been part of the decision-making method. Second, System 1, or more intuitive thinking, as described by Bazerman and Moore, was likely in play here, as news outlets reported that leaders knew they needed to act fast to get proper information to citizens. Third, the prescriptive method was likely used here, as leaders aimed to make a decision for the best possible outcome. Given the need for a quick decision, the actual decision-making process, or knowing how the decision was made, was not likely top of mind for leaders. Bazerman and Moore noted that even the brightest, most experienced leaders can make mistakes in the decision-making process, and the common phrase, hindsight is 20/20, rings true when analyzing how decisions were likely made. After analyzing Hawaii leaders' decision in response to the false missile alert, I agree with many of the processes and methods they most likely used. However, based on learnings from scholars and management professionals, I would add some additional methods to the process and focus more on some of the decision-making process steps. Looking at Bazerman and Moore's decision-making process again, I noted Hawaii leaders appeared to follow the first 2 steps, but may have only loosely followed the subsequent 4 steps, while the actual processes of weighing the criteria, rating the solution, and computing the optimal decision may not have been particularly relevant in this decision that needed to be made quickly. More relaxed or mini versions of each step should still have been part of the decision-making process. For example, while a mathematical equation for weighing the criteria may not have been right in this situation, recognizing which criteria were the most important to solve for would be an important step. Additionally, it may have been wise to explore alternatives in conjunction with working to issue a response via the original alert method. For example, Huffington Post noted military alerted Governor Ige of the mistake 2 minutes after the false alert went out. With that, a possible alternative solution may have been to use other outlets like the governor's social media sites and media to quickly get the notice of the mistake to citizens. This is an example of the importance of generating alternative solutions. Other solutions may have been able to get the information to citizens quicker and reduce anxiety and fear. The governor and state representative Gabbard did indeed mention the mistake on social media, but I argue this could have been done much sooner if alternate solutions were evaluated earlier in the decision-making process. The problem and criteria were easily defined, so solutions should have been generated quickly. Even if alternatives were developed, I believe the leaders still would have made an announcement via the original alert system. However, there could have been other strategies applied as well. In addition to enhancing some of the decision-making steps, other decision-making methods may have been beneficial to leaders in this situation. As discussed, leaders likely used heuristics, system-one thinking, and prescriptive decision-making, all as described by Bazerman and Moore. All of these methods seemed appropriate given the need to make a quick decision to get accurate information to residents. In addition to these methods, critical thinking, a decision-making team, and an inquiry-based decision process could have been helpful. In 2011, Patterson described critical thinking as using information in a thoughtful and logical manner. It's unclear if leaders thought critically about the decision or the decision-making process in this situation. Researchers including Patterson and Leclerc and Maldivanu stress the need for critical thinking in decision-making, noting it can be useful in many ways to understand criteria, develop alternatives, and come to the best possible solution. In 2015, Hoffman noted organizations have become more complex and there's a need for faster decision-making. This was indeed the case with the Hawaii missile alert mistake. The author supported that decision-makers should be closer to the problem and a cross-functional team should be in place. It's unclear who exactly made the decision in this case and who was involved in the process. Even though a timely decision was needed, bringing together people from various roles within state leadership could have allowed the ultimate decision-maker to hear more points of view and reach a solution that worked for the most impacted people. An inquiry-based decision process, as described by Peterson in 2004, states there's no prize for those who come up with a solution that's ultimately used. Instead, the focus is on what is right for the organization, not who is right. If used during this event, this could have allowed for maximum input for an optimal solution without blame or need to have a winning solution. This method, along with being able to quickly bring in cross-functional teams and use critical thinking, involves fostering a culture of decision-making. These are not likely methods that could be introduced and quickly put into place. Instead, it may behoove the organizations involved to encourage these methods as part of the organizational culture. During this presentation, I identified the emergency, presented the fundamentals of a rational decision-making process, reviewed and analyzed the actual steps and methods leaders took to come to a decision, and recommended additional decision-making process steps and methods that could have been beneficial for leaders. As mentioned earlier, applying the suggested methods may not have changed the actual decision leaders made. However, they provide a thorough, well-rounded, research-based decision-making process.